So I'm going to talk about the offsets, false mapping, lack of ground truthing and other abuses of science and process. Hopefully I can get through this fairly quickly. So this is the critically endangered ecological community, which you've seen quite a few, slides of, but this is actually on Wirradale. This is when Phil and I went for a wander to check it out. So their offset requirements, I won't go into detail with these because everybody's covered them a bit. So they got approval under New South Wales legislation in 2012, and they got approval under the EPBC Act in 2013, and I need to put my glasses on because I can't read. It's important to note that both approvals have been modified several times at the request of Maules Creek Coal. So every time it doesn't suit them, we put in a modification. The project requires staged clearing of the forest, and Phil's already gone into those figures, so I won't repeat them. And as part of their approvals, the New South Wales and Commonwealth, they were required to protect 5,532 hectares of white box, yellow box, Blakely's red gum, grassy woodland and derived grassland, which is the critically endangered ecological community. And it must be managed to achieve equivalent or better quality condition. And someone has already pointed out that's a pretty airy-fairy statement. They were also supposed to protect 9,334 hectares of habitat for only three threatened species, the regent honeyeater, swift parrot and greater long-eared bat. And again, it has to be equivalent or better quality, and that 9,000 hectares can contain the 5,000 hectares of white box woodland. So false mapping and ground truthing to do with the northern offsets. And the map up there is, as Bill pointed out, the northern offsets area. And this is the area that was originally mapped as box gum woodland by Cumberland Ecology. So they initially mapped it on Wirradale and Mount Lindsay, consistent, according to them, to the Commonwealth CEC listing. I would dispute the fact of whether they've actually done that. And you should note that they identified 5,644 hectares of the CEC, and that at that point the Maules Creek Coal required 5,532 hectares. So they're hunky-dory. They've got their offsets, just in the northern offsets. And then we came along. And investigations by Phil, myself and Dr. John Hunter identified that it was likely to be a gross overstatement of the area. We were actually shot down for those statements originally. We were told we were compromised because we weren't being paid to actually make those statements. Apparently, if you get paid, you've actually got more credibility than people who don't get paid. So the area of CECC was, because we put out papers that said they were wrong, the area of CEC was amended in 2014 by an independent peer review by Greenland in Biostudies to 3,910 hectares, which is 31% less than Cumberland Ecology originally said was there. And there was, as Phil said, they weren't really independent, Greenland in Biostudies, we discovered. So, still on the ground truthing, so our findings were confirmed, or they weren't confirmed, until 2020, when myself and Vanessa Hunter were given access to the northern offsets to ground truth the mapped wooded CECC. We could have ground truthed it all, but at that stage, Maules Creek Coal were actually replanting the derived grasslands. So there was no point us looking at the derived grasslands because they'd been faffed about with. So we just concentrated on the wooded vegetation. And we were there, we were doing it for the South East Forest Rescue people and the Environmental Defenders Office. So we spent a week on the northern offsets. Sorry, I'll go back a bit. And as you can see by the photos, we found different communities than the CECC. So that one's red stringy bark, apple box shrubby woodland, white box orange gum shrubby woodland, and stringy bark open forest shrubby, not CECC grassy box gum woodland. So these are the sites that Vanessa and I went to. It's interesting to note that they wouldn't let Vanessa's husband, Dr. John Hunter, on the property. They thought he was compromised. He wasn't very happy, can I just point that out with that? So we got another hunter, we got his wife to come and help us. So we figured they got a hunter anyway, and Vanessa is a very good botanist. So our ground truthing confirmed that of the 21 plots that Vanessa and I did, and all these plots were located in polygons that they had mapped as critically endangered ecological community, only 29% of our plots were the community. The rest were not, which means that only 29% of the wooded CECC that was mapped by Green Learning Biostudies was actually the CECC. So they're still not right. And then that was further confirmed when AMBS, so the Australian Museum Science Unit, went out and were paid by MCC to remap all their offset areas, and MCC found only a total of 2,581 hectares of CECC, and less of which was only 1,391 hectares of the wooded CEC. So critically endangered ecological community white box is divided into that still has trees, and that which still only is the ground cover. So the derived grassland is the ground cover area. The wooded stuff is the stuff that still has its overstory. So basically their own consultants, their second consultants that they paid for, found that Green Learning Biostudies had misidentified 53% of the area. So then, as a result of those findings, we presume, I'm skipped. These significant discrepancies raise important questions. So how did the original mapping by by Cumberland Ecology, and then the independent review by Green Learning Biostudies get the area of boxgum woodland CEC on the northern offsets so wrong? Now, we can all speculate as to why that happened. I know I've got my own opinions as to why that happened, but I won't. I'll let you make up your own mind. And then from that you go, so was this apparent error repeated across the other offset areas, the eastern, western and southern offsets, which they had to acquire because suddenly they don't have their lovely offset area just in the northern offsets, for the 2017 BMP, is that my pointer? Okay. So these are the, as Bill pointed out, they're the extra properties that they acquired at that point. And then the whole thing calls into question the independent review process that goes into this, because the independent reviewers are paid similarly by the mining company and presumably put forward by the original consultants. And then without any true independent review, how can we trust the efficacy of the AMBS mapping of additional offset areas, which now in Maules Creek Coal are now putting forward? So Bill went into the various offset properties, and that's the same map, so that just lists the properties that they had. So abuses of science. Maules Creek Coal additional offsets areas. In 2022, AMBS mapped vegetation on 5 additional proposed offset properties: Thornfield, Triangle, Narrangai, North, Coonor and Long Gully. For reasons we're not entirely sure why, although we've got our suspicions. MCC sought approval to modify their New South Wales project approval, Modification 9, to authorise the changes to the existing biodiversity offset strategy. This strategy involved the inclusion of 5 new properties and the removal of a number of previous 2017 offset properties, including quite a lot of those around the immediate mining precinct, which are the ones in yellowy sort of colour on your screen. They're actually in orange on mine. Our suspicion is that eventually they figure they want to mine through those ones, because under the Biodiversity Conservation Act, even though you put an offset a conservation agreement in perpetuity over the area, the minister can revoke that in perpetuity agreement at any point if you're a mining company or a petroleum company. So that in perpetuity means nothing. So as I said, AVMS looked at 5 new properties as offsets. This is a map of the original offsets and then the additional properties. The additional properties are Thornfield, which sits between Wallandilly and Onavale, Triangle, which is just west of Barraba, Narangi North and Kununor, which is between Barraba and Bundara, and then Long Gully, which is just south of Tinga. So I'm from Inverell, my part of the world. Long Gully is over 300 kilometres from the original mining precinct. Hardly a decent offset. So, according to Moores Creek Coal, a number of factors resulted in the need to modify the biodiversity offset strategy, including a revised process for establishing long-term security of offset areas with the introduction of the New South Wales Biodiversity Conservation Act. BS would be what I'd say to that, in that there has always been a process to have in perpetuity agreements on private properties. Admittedly, they weren't called offset agreements, but you could still put in perpetuity agreements. It was run by OEH. It was run for a lot of years prior to the Biodiversity Conservation Act. I was one of their assessors for that system, and I know it didn't change, notably different in 2016. So there should have been no reason. The second reason was a revised vegetation classification system in New South Wales. So yes, the New South Wales government looked at changing the veg classification, basically because when they came up with the veg classification system, which is plant community types, shortened to PCTs, 5 minutes, right, good knows, they were basically sorting out the plant community types. So it didn't really change, and CECCs do not match plant community types anyway, so it makes no bloody difference to what they were doing. Revised listing of white box, yellow box, Blakely's red gum woodland. Under the New South Wales legislation, they're supposed to be mapping to the federal legislation. It didn't change. There is a big difference between those two bits of legislation, but what they were mapping to was always the same. A detailed survey of property boundaries by a registered property surveyor. Yes, as people who here own properties will know, there's always give and take. Boundaries, fences aren't always along boundary lines, etc., etc. So there were some minor changes. I think it was around like 120 hectares difference, but really didn't make that much difference. And variations to the biodiversity offset conditions in the Commonwealth EPBC Act. I can't comment on that. I haven't bothered to waste my mental energy to go back and check what the changes were to that. So maybe that's a legitimate one, but the other 4 are really not legit. So one of the things they need to do is the MCC biodiversity strategy has to be consistent with the Forest Mining Precinct Regional Biodiversity Strategy. However, 3 of the new offset properties are incompatible with this strategy. Long Gully, which is the one in the very top corner, south of Tinga, is located entirely in the New England Tablelands bioregion. Their offsets have to be in the Nandewar or in the Brigalow Belt South. Not consistent. And Kunor and Narangi North are also half located in the New England Tablelands bioregion. So because of that, they don't have the same soil types, they don't have the same topography, they don't have the same rainfall, they don't have the same climate. So they're not compatible. Consequently, Long Gully and parts of the other 2 properties are definitely not like for like, and should not be accepted as offsets for the MCC operation. However, they've been approved. And this is why you should have like for like. Right. The animals affected in Laird get no benefit from having properties at huge distance away from them, and protecting the CECC at Long Gully really isn't going to do much to be compatible with the CECC that they cleared in Laird. So the other abuse of science that I've witnessed is the Moores Creek Coal requesting to change their vegetation clearing timing. Rather than staggering their vegetation disturbance over 21 years as initially required by their approval, they've applied to do all their clearing by year 15. So they were supposed to carry out to year 21. To justify this change, they commissioned a report by Eco-Planning in 2021. Not surprisingly, the Eco-Planning report found that combined clearing that would have occurred in year 15 and 21 will only remove a very small portion of boxgum woodland CEC and habitat for 3 threatened species of concern within the Liverpool Plains sub-region of the Brigalow Belt South Ibra region, and they also included the whole of the Brigalow Belt South. What I find interesting about this is, one, they intended to finish their boxgum woodland clearing in the year 15. So why this was included in the Eco-Planning report, who knows? They were intending to keep clearing habitat for the 3 threatened species. But the methodology they used to come to this conclusion is severely flawed. Eco-Planning used the vegetation maps in New South Wales seed database to determine the extent of remaining boxgum woodland CEC and the habitat for the 3 threatened species. So what they've done is they've gone in, looked at the plant community types, gone, these are the plant community types associated with these species, and these are the plant community types associated with the CECC. But as I said earlier, plant community types don't match the CEC listing, so you're going to grossly overestimate the area of CECC by doing that. And it was irrelevant anyway, because they weren't actually going to be clearing. Who knows? Maybe they were going to change that as well. They were putting in another modification. So shortened of that, the problem with this approach is the vegetation mapping within seed does not directly correlate with boxgum woodland CEC description. There is a critically endangered ecological community map, and there is one for boxgum woodland because I sat on the panel for that. But it's mapped to the state listing, and not the federal listing. So it helps them not one iota, because there's a massive difference. And anybody who wants to know the difference, I can tell you. And there is no condition rating within the seed database for PCTs, which means it could be 10-year-old regrowth PCT, it could be 150-year-old old growth woodland or forest. You don't know. The 3 species they're dealing with are very dependent on old growth and very mature vegetation. So it means nothing. So it's false science, if you like. It sounds good, but it means nothing. Very quickly, abuses of science. EDO in 2024 identified that mining companies are putting in individual modifications. So Moore Creek coal is up to about modification 11. Boggabri coal, you've got various modifications. This avoids the need for them to get an approval for what would be considered a much larger action under all sorts of triggers. So the cumulative impact of these individual actions is never considered by approval authorities. And in a situation like Laird, where you've got 3 separate coal mines all doing little bits of things all over the place, that's really important, that the cumulative impact be taken into account. And if you're not taking into account cumulative impact, then you cannot have appropriate mitigation to avoid the impacts on those species. So this whole process needs to be reviewed and stopped. So I'm at the end. In nature, there are neither rewards nor punishments, there are only consequences, and we will be feeling the consequences at some point in time. And thank you for listening.